Dysfunctional Vet here. I'm going to be evaluating the Coleman CT200U EX mini bike sold by Tractor Supply. Alright, let's start off with this little jewel. First and foremost, it has this little hatch that's on the top. The thing was almost impossible to open. The hinge was bent and I had to fix that so that I'd be able to open it. It does come with a tool set, which is like standard for any kind of like little motorbike. The bike has this really decent guard to protect you where your chain drive and centrifugal clutch is. Basically it runs reasonably well, not great. I think it's a problem with the choke. I'll be checking on that a little bit later. Right now I'm getting less than 2 miles to the tank of fuel, and I diagnosed it to a leak in the fuel line, which I'm about to start sorting out. That thing you see swinging is my flexible scope. Now, one of the problems with this thing is right down here. I'm going to zoom in on it. That is how the tank mounts, is with these bolts. The problem is I don't know where the leak is coming from. When the fuel shut off, it drips just as bad as when the fuel is turned on, and I really hate wasting fuel to find it. I'm about to disassemble it. On the inside of this little baby, we have these hex heads, and I'm going to pull the tank off just to get better access in so that I can view this. And on the other side, I open this thing up. You can see that the fuel on-off choke, that's this white area and black right down there. All this stuff is completely caged by plastic. The air filter is in place, and yesterday I didn't have a flashlight to look down inside of it when I was figuring out there was a big issue. I just bought this thing, by the way. I took it out for a test drive and ran out of gasoline on my way back. Drove out basically about 1 mile, and about half a mile back I ran out of gasoline, and I put a little bit in it yesterday and noticed it was just running out on the ground. It was too late in the day to try to diagnose anything. Now I'm going to see if I can show this to you up close and personal. If you look, your carburetor throttle plate covers just almost everything in the engine. This engine is not a bad engine, but when it was built to make sure that it would just be a total problem to work on. I guess so that the mechanics make money off of it. Doesn't matter. We're going to see what we can do with it, and then we're going to go from there. Before I get too far along, this is your fuel shutoff, and if you turn this off, which that's the off position, or if you turn it to the on position, it made no difference about the gasoline running out. So I don't know if I have a ruptured tank or if I have a line that's not connected. I'm thinking I have a line that's not connected, because if you look up here, this is, when I got it, this thing was hand tight, finger tight, and now it's basically crap. This one up here is the same way. I'm going to tighten that up. I'm going to put a new bolt and washer on this, and I'm going to double check all this stuff. I went over the pre-checks before you start driving out of the book, and all that stuff appeared to be tight, but obviously the quality control of Tractor Supply is a massive vacuum, if you catch my drift. Alright, here's why I'm losing fuel. See where that fuel clamp is on there? Hang, I can't even see it, and I'm filming this stupid thing. There it is, right there in the center of the film, right there. That is way behind the fuel tank, so the fuel's been running out and around it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some needle nose pliers and put that back into position. I'm going to put fuel in it, see if it holds fuel. If it doesn't, then I'm going to replace it with a clamp. I had to remove this plate right here in order to remove the 2 screws that hold that tank into place. I do not recommend you do this unless you are really paying attention, because there's a lot of little pieces that go back inside here, and if you screw something up, the bike ain't going to work. I need to fix this and put it all back together. We'll see what happens. As I put this back together, this bolt right here holds the fuel tank in. This one I removed. I wasn't sure what it did. I don't think it does anything. But this one you have to remove. This is an 8mm. There's two on the front that I previously talked about. These are 10mm, and this one has the ground wire on it. So make sure you get that ground back on there. In just a moment, I'm going to see if I can figure out if this choke is completely opening or if it's not. I think it is, but I can't look down through this thing and see the choke. The carburetor is down underneath this plastic. I'm going to have to remove that, and I'm just going to make sure that the choke is completely opening, because it seems to be choking out, but that could also be a problem with it not getting full fuel due to the fact that this little jewel was losing it and might have been sucking in air. I'm going to finish putting this together. I'm going to take it for a short test drive, and then we'll come back and visit with this. As I'm putting this back together, I want to show you something real quick. This piece right here lifts off. You have this little washer underneath it, but this piece fits on there. If you disassemble down to the level that I did, you really need to pay attention. One of the tricks of the trade when you're taking something apart you've never done is to videotape as you disassemble it so that you can put it back together. Now, I have a lock washer that goes on top of this, and it was not terribly tight. So what I've got to do as I reassemble this throttle cable is that what I need to do, well, see, we've got slack in it, and that may also be a part of the problem why we're not getting full power. But what I have to do as I tighten this little jewel up is I have to constantly check and make sure that this piece freely moves when it's pulled, and that I don't pull everything apart. Let's make sure everybody's still where it needs to be. So again, if you're not mechanically inclined, talk to somebody who is. Make sure that you don't screw something up. Now I'm going to have to turn the camera off in order to replace all this stuff where it goes. Alright, post reassembly, the ring clamp has started to leak. It's much slower than it was, but it's still there. So I'm going to have to get something else that will really crimp down on it, and I'm not sure I have anything with me right now. This was not a planned repair. I was just hoping the material that was there would work, and apparently it doesn't want to. So tomorrow I will make a trip that I don't want to make, and I will get the material that I need, and I will fix this thing so it stops leaking, which will be another tear down. But while this took me about 40 minutes to tear it down because I had never done this before, I didn't know what I was getting into, I think tomorrow I can probably do it in maybe 20 minutes from start to finish. That's including putting a ring clamp on it. And by ring clamp, I'm talking something that cinches down with a band. Okay, put it back together. I still had a leak. Right here, you can see this micro tear that was in the fuel line. I cut this out, and this piece ripped off when I did. So I clipped that. I now have preserved in that tank whatever amount of fuel I had left after it had dripped out. Now, I didn't have a lot of gasoline in there to begin with, but I have essentially lost 3 gallons, or about $6 worth of gasoline, because of this little bitty tear, because of the problem. Now I'm thinking that the thing was loose from the fuel tank where this ring was seated, because it was too far back. I'm not sure what that's showing, but it was just behind the copper line that comes off of this. Now once I took the tank completely off, physically removed it from the bike, I found that what connects there, you have a plastic tank, and then you have a nylon grommet that comes down, ties into a nipple that ties into this fuel line. Now I've taken approximately 1 inch off of this. I'm not sure of the total length. I'll be replacing this whole thing later, not right immediately, but fairly quick, just so that I have plenty of fuel line and I'm not stretching anything. But in the meanwhile, I've got it back together. The fuel leak has stopped. I'm getting ready to take it for a short test drive. I'm going to probably run up the street and steal some gasoline from a friend of mine if he'll let me steal it from him. And then I will be taking this bike for a longer ride. Now, I still have to replace this bolt right here that came out, and I have some spares, so that's not a problem. And I'll be checking to make sure everything else on this thing is tight. Even though I did a pre-inspection, I didn't check these bolts here and right up here. I did check the important stuff, the handlebars and the rear suspension and all that good stuff front. You know, I checked all that. The tire pressure is 10 pounds front and back. They're fairly big tires. I'm not looking forward to having to replace one of these just because of the... I owned a motorcycle years ago. I never liked replacing tires, but I've had to do it. But it comes with the territory. Anyway, with that said, I think that the choke is probably off. I think that this thing has an adjustment on it. Conjecture on my part. I think it has a governor just so it doesn't go terribly fast. I think it will do maybe 20 miles an hour, which is plenty fast for what I'm doing. And the one modification I'm going to make to this bike, down here we have this yoke area right there. I'm going to put some flashing on that and curl it back around and what's the word I'm after? Anyway, put it back together with pop rivets, just to keep dirt from getting on the engine. And on the back side back here, I'm going to go ahead and take this fender and bring down to this piece right here, just so I don't get dirt on the engine. That should help a great deal with saving the engine life by not holding heat against the engine. By and large, except for the fact that whoever put this thing together was an idiot and probably should have their head examined, I'm not finding a lot of problems with the Coleman bike. Again, this is for somebody a lot younger, smaller than I am, but for my purposes, I can justify the purchase of it rather than buying this was $590, I think. I can justify this over spending $8,000 for one of those four-wheelers that the Tractor Supply sells, or $8,000 or more for a four-wheeler like a Honda Polaris, which is, if I'm going to buy the best. Okay, if you remember, I removed a plate back inside here. Make sure that your springs underneath are back in place. One of them was not quite set, and I could not decelerate. I couldn't get the thing to throttle down. It wanted to run wide open. Now I've got my new bolt right here. It's a little bit long, that's okay. I'll be putting some thread tight on it a little bit later, or thread lock, whatever you want to call it. I've tightened the other one. The other one was quite loose. And I took it for a test spin. Did just fine. Without it sucking the air in, that eliminated the problem with the question of the choke. And to put it bluntly, it's running like a champ. Would I recommend this motorbike? Tentatively, I'll give it 3 stars. There's a couple of issues with it that are just, I think, personal preference more than anything else. One, it's a bit small for an older adult to be driving. Again, I bought this because I didn't feel like spending $8,000 for either one of the four-wheeler car-like things that Tractor Supply sells, or $8,000 to $10,000 for a Honda Polaris, which is the four-wheeler I would buy if I was just going to be using something like this. What I'm using this for is to run up and down the road when I have errands that I have to make. One other thing, when I had the leak in the fuel line, it would not idle for anything. And that's why I was thinking there was something of a choke issue. When I found that I was leaking fuel like crazy, then that kind of let me know there was another issue. all in all, I'm happy with the bike. Would I buy another one? Probably not. And I mean, if this thing wears out, I'll probably be too old to be thinking about being on something like this. So I'll take care of it. I keep it inside, keep it dry. I think I mentioned that this latch was really messed up. You can see all the scratches where I, shall we say, tried to get it so that it would work properly. It doesn't stay shut as well as it did, but at least it will now actually shut, and I can open it without fighting it, because previously it was all I could do to get this open. All in all, like I say, 3 stars, maybe 3.5. It's not a bad little bike, and if you have one, I think you'll be fairly happy with it. Dysfunctional vet out. Dysfunctional vet. Earlier I had this out and I was using this to work on the motorbike that you would have seen. It's the Coleman mini bike. Something I want to tell you about. This is a Whistler. There are other brands. I just happened to get this just because it was on sale at the time. You have a power button. You can rotate your image. You have a lamp, and I can't remember what this button is. But what I was going to tell you, whenever you're using one of these scopes, what you need to do before you put it into a hole is you need to orient this thing so you know what's top, what's left, what's right, and what's on the bottom. The reason being is because as you go in there, you're going to be manipulating this thing. If you do not know what's on top, what's on bottom, it can be extremely confusing. I'm going to try to actually do a complete video on using one of these scopes if you've never used one, and if I do that, then I'll link it into the description later if I remember to do so. I have a bad habit of forgetting to put links in when I'm making these videos.